All right, Tillmann, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. So you are the co-founder and CEO of Yova, and we're going to dive a little bit more into that in a second. But let's start with the story. Story also behind you. Maybe you can share one or two moments that you feel really shaped you as a human being or as an entrepreneur.
Okay. So I've always been, so my background is actually in mathematics and computer science. So I've always been interested in technology. But personally, I've always been very interested in environmental issues and topics, which is mainly driven by the fact that I love being outdoors and hiking and skiing and on water, on land, everything, ever since I've been small. I think one of the defining moments in my career was actually after it might have been in the first year of my career. I was in a large consulting firm, and I was working on a project where we were looking into the future of climate and energy markets. Yeah, so how does the world evolve? What does that mean for carbon gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions like carbon? But also, what does that then mean for the quality of living and the economy? And my job was to build the model that would compute it all. So if we came up with a scenario where we'd say everybody shifts to electric mobility, what would that mean for greenhouse gas emissions? And it was my job to compute that. And that was quite a defining experience because I had two realizations. The first one was like, oh my God, this problem is a big one. It's not an easy fix. It's like all encompassing. It's something where we really need to do something. Otherwise, all the scenarios are actually quite gloomy. And that was for me, so I had it sink in by just doing the math myself, how big a problem this is. But at the same time, I was fascinated by the kind of scenarios that we were building and the things you can do to fight climate change. And at the core of that, the awesome technologies that are out there, starting with things that are nowadays normal, like solar and wind energy, but also electric mobility, smart grid technology, smarter ways of consuming, of manufacturing, all these kind of things. And I got very fascinated by these ideas and how they interact with each other, but also with the existing economy. And this project, which went on for maybe 4 to 5 months, for me was really like a big turning point where this fascination for technology and sustainability turned into something where I thought, okay, not only is this something where I feel a certain sense of duty, but also something that is so fascinating for me that I want to devote at least a lot of my professional energy into. And I mean, back then I was 25, now it's 10 years later, and that question hasn't changed. I've grown more and more fascinated and more also compelled to use my own talent and time and energy to work on sustainability problems ever since.
Now that's really interesting. You mentioned this project before to me, and talking about your story, you had a point where you worked with McKinsey. Correct. And I'm very curious about that because some people told me that their McKinsey experience was like their business boot camp. Mm-hmm. It was like it was like a master's degree in 6 months. Mm-hmm. In business, basically, but in practical business. What was that experience for you? I mean, especially because you were not on the, you were on the, I think, on the non-profit project side, right? But where you work.
Oh no, I did
on
projects.
Different kinds of projects.
So I always was working on sustainability projects with technology, okay. But I was working with NGOs as well as with corporations. Okay. Yes.
So how did that journey? Do you feel like that journey, the McKinsey journey, shaped you as well in some way because it was a very different environment than most other environments when you get started in some other company or some other business line? Do you feel like that was a...
For sure it shaped me. So first of all, I mean, when I finished university, I didn't have a lot of knowledge about the business world. I had scratched the surface here and there, and I realized that it actually matches my interests and skills. But most of my university time I had actually prepared for a career in academia and research. So most of the topics that I looked into in my university times, be that machine learning or AI or optimization and robotics, was more on a research kind of path. I joined McKinsey, and McKinsey indeed was for me my business degree basically, and it works quite well with that. But there are other defining insights. So first of all, I'm always like excited by, or what fascinates me also in entrepreneurship, are business ideas that bring positive impact into the mainstream. Yeah, so I never saw myself as the person that would just, be on demonstrations and tell others to behave differently, but actually I wanted to unlock things where, where you can really push the mainstream on a more sustainable track. And back when I was at McKinsey, I was still at a stage in my career where I could actually cherry pick my projects because I wasn't a partner yet. I didn't have to, work with clients over the long run. I could switch from project to project. So I was really looking for projects where I thought, okay, this is something where I can change large corporations from within. And at that point in time, given that I did not have a lot of experience and not a lot of knowledge on how the business world even works, I always felt like McKinsey was the perfect place for me in the sense that I can have the most impact given my junior level of experience and my junior level of knowledge. And that switched at some point in time. So after I spent more time working on the topics that I care about and getting more experience and also growing a lot of confidence at McKinsey, when I was a couple of years in, I realized, okay, now I actually think I'm strong enough to do something outside of McKinsey and do something myself, and I have a lot of ideas that actually I think can become mainstream, but they have a much better chance of doing so if I don't do it from within large corporations that more often than not, try to manifest the status quo rather than change it, but rather from the outside as an entrepreneur.
Okay, very interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the why of things. I'm very curious, has there been a red thread throughout your career where you say that's always been sort of like the red thread purpose, the red thread why? Or in other words, what is it that gets you up in the morning?
Well, what gets me up in the morning is usually my son. Because most of the time he gets up before I want to get up. No, but I mean, to answer your question, yes. So I mean, what I described before, this, I do feel a certain sense of duty. I think, like, especially climate change, maybe the defining challenge of our generation. And there have been like a lot of problems or big problems, societal problems in the past. But what is special about climate change is, first of all, we know it's there, right? There's like, if you're willing to believe in science, like I do, then there's no way negating that climate change exists. And basically negating that climate change exists means that negating that, or claiming that every scientist in the world, or 99.99% of the world's scientists, are lying and collaborating to, I don't know, for some weird reason. So you cannot just negotiate that away. Our generation knows, So I think I personally feel that we have a chance to either go on with what's happening right now, but then I think at some point I will have to answer to my son, who's waking me up in the morning now, but I will have to answer to him is, you guys were knowing what was going on. Why did you not do anything about it? And I want to have a good answer to the question, what did you do with your time and your energy to make sure that it's still a livable place when my son takes it over? And that has always motivated me, or it always keeps me going. At the same time, so I mean, that sense of duty side has another side to it that I simply find fascinating. To me, I've had the privilege to always been able to work on things that fascinate me, and look for topics that I find interesting. And my technological interest, they're very well matches up with my interests for purposeful work, or something, where I feel like I'm not doing something just for the sake of making money or paying rent, but actually something that I can be proud of, and that I can be proud of also when I talk to my kids about it in a couple of decades.
Now that's a very, very strong, storyline for the why, and a very strong why in itself. Let's talk about Yova, because I'm very interested in seeing the connect there. Maybe you can quickly say a couple of words about Yova, and also how what you guys doing are connecting to that, bigger purpose, bigger why.
Very good. So Yova is about impact investing. So the idea is that we want to bring sustainability to the mainstream in finance. That's basically what Yova is about. And the why behind that is that we as a team, and now I'm not only talking about myself, but about the founders team, and actually now the whole team of people that are working at Yova, we believe that there are problems to solve, and we actually we believe that finance has a major potential for facilitating this kind of change. As it turns out, the financial sector is quite important, or has a lot of influence on societal and technological progress, and there are many examples for that, right? So whether you can simply put where the money is where progress is. However, you and me, normal people, have no say in the question, where does the money go? It's actually a super non-democratic system, because the question where the money goes is decided by institutional investors, by pension funds, by large asset managers, by the state, obviously. So the state is the more democratic side of things, because at least it's the policymakers that we elect. But in general, a large part of the question, where does the money go, where does the capital go, is outside of society's hands, and therefore also doesn't account for society's wishes, because I do think that most people actually care about the world and care about the future. So we want to provide a way, or we saw a way with a business model to funnel a lot more capital into the firms that build the kind of future that we want to live in. So a future that is characterized by human rights, by gender equality, but also by low carbon economy, that just, where we don't consume the planet, but we actually keep the planet. But at the same time, we realize that this can only work as a mainstream idea if you couple it with a good financial return. So it's not about giving up, it's not about giving to charity. So the Yova model is it's very important to us that you have these two sides, and that's what really defines impact investing. You do have a positive impact, but you also have a financial return, because the people that we are serving, our clients, are not high net worth individuals or very rich people or large corporations. It's normal people, it's people like me and you. So it's people that need to prepare for the future because they don't have wealth to live on. They need to invest their income because they know when they grow old, they will not be a pension. They want to prepare for maybe owning a house or prepare for their children. So it's this duality that is very important. And with Yova, we found that we actually found a way to make it easily for people to prepare for their own financial future while also doing something good for the world. So we believe it's a great setup. So it's basically about empowering people to take care for themselves while also taking care of the future.
Now this is really interesting. I'm always interested in how the what of a company resonates with the why of the founder or one of the founders or the founder's team. Basically, so if I just have to sort of like put it in my own words, the way I see it is that you're leveraging the finance as a vehicle, basically. So impact investing, finance as a vehicle to support, accelerate, drive the positive impact on the world, which also includes the whole environmental climate change issues, basically. But I think what you're also doing is you're expanding on that with Yova. So you're not you're not channeling it into purely climate, but you're expanding it on the scale of impact, and Yova is on the scale of basically societal impact, so broader than that, and you found a vehicle to accelerate that, basically. So that's how I put it in my own words.
Exactly, that's the way we see it. So climate change is one of the topics, but there are a lot of social topics, and we've discussed already human rights, gender equality, maybe family friendly employers, fair ways of doing economics and trade. But also a lot of other environmental dimensions. Think about biodiversity, think about clean water, pollution in general. It's not only about climate change, but just having like fresh air to breathe for people around the globe. So it's a lot of these topics, yes.
Do you somehow use the UN Sustainable Development Goals as guidelines, or is that almost something like separate from the categories that you define?
No, well, we don't use them operationally in our work, but we do use them as guidance. So we think we are big believers that the UN actually did a great job at formulating these, and what they are very helpful, or what we use them for, is that many people know them, and for many people it's easy to understand them. Because in general, the question, what is sustainability or what is not sustainability, is very vague and ambiguous, and it's not very clear for people. So we really try hard to make it clear what it means and what it doesn't mean. Also accounting for a lot of grayscale in between, because there's no white sustainable and black non-sustainable. A lot of it is the in-between, and actually about making a step forward rather than just having a clean conscience. And in these kind of communication challenges, the SDGs do help us quite a bit. But also when we think about quantifying our own impact, we do tie to SDGs in the sense that we think about, say, how much CO2 have we avoided or have we helped our clients avoid? These kind of things, yes.
Okay. So let's talk about lessons learned a little bit. So you've been on a pretty fast growth in entrepreneurial journey now. And I'm very curious about some of the major lessons. And it could be there, it could be from before that. But I'm very interested. Maybe you can share one or two lessons that you feel like there were some really, really important things you learned along the way. And how did you learn them in some of the context maybe?
Well, there are a couple. I think the funny thing is, for me, a lot of the lessons people had told me before I learned them myself, but there are these things that you just, you have to fall on your own face in order to really have it sink in. And I think one of those things is that things go a lot different than you think, but that can actually be very okay, or can actually be a lot better than you think. So I think the path that we took, it's pretty much it's fully still in line with the vision that we had. But things we took a couple of turns that we didn't expect. I'll give you an example. In the beginning, there was a time just in the beginning when we thought we build an investment solution mostly for millennials or young people. And we realized that that's not true, that actually people that are further ahead in their careers, or maybe even already retired, actually are super excited about what we have to offer. And that of course had a lot of implications for the way we built the product, because a millennial interacts differently with any kind of solutions than a baby boomer, and also you might not find them. I mean, our youngest customers, we cannot even reach them on Facebook anymore. Our oldest customers, we can also not reach on Facebook, so we have to be quite diverse in how we communicate people and also how we interact with them. So I think being open for having your plan, as something to set out with, but changing it constantly and being fine with that, and actually seeing that as an opportunity, because a lot of times it might actually get better than you might have thought of. I think that's a big lesson. Yeah.
So this is a really interesting one. I would actually, if I'm trying to sort of dissect it, what I'm hearing is the vision's the same, but the plan changed. So it's almost like the vision is very much something almost put in stone, but the plan underneath of that, the more detailed part, can change. Maybe it stays the same, but the vision, as you said, out basically is pretty much, that's still very much in alignment.
Yes, I think a vision is very hard to change. A vision is the why.
Yeah.
If you change the why, then everything else changes, and probably that means there would be a different company. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is there another lesson that you feel like was really a big one along the way?
Well, there were plenty. I'm thinking about what the biggest ones might have been.
Or just anyone, or any lesson.
So I think another lesson that is not news to people is just test. Talk to your customers. They will tell you a lot of things that you would have never seen, where you think, I've designed this awesome product, everybody will love it, and then the first tester doesn't even understand what it is. I think that's definitely a lesson. I think in terms of building a good network of advisors is also super, super crucial. And sometimes people with a lot of experience can be super helpful, but sometimes it's just the people that really share your mission and energy. They can also be super helpful because they might have great ideas. And a lot of the problems that we face, it turns out that somebody who has had a fascinating career with 30 years of, experience in a very, very cool job might have never experienced, so they're not in a better position to provide an answer compared with somebody young with the energy. So I think having a good network of advisors and contributors is super important, but there it's more about the originality and the passion of the people rather than the experience. That said, of course, it's important to build a network. It's also good to have people that have experience and can tell you to just calm down when you're in a storm, maybe, because that of course also happens.
Yeah. Okay, really good point. The next piece really plays into that, but it's a bit more about entrepreneurship as a thing. I think you told me this when we talked the first time about how you tested the offerings, in a very practical, offline, face-to-face way. How did you go about, the testing of things?
Well, we're big believers in iteration and a very lean approach to product development. So yes, what I told you is, in fact, when we started discussing the idea, we were amazed by the vision and the potential, but we weren't sure whether anybody else would be, right? So the first thing that we did is we just wrote it up, and we basically designed a website-like kind of thing in PowerPoint to make it as easy as possible. And we just went around cafes in Zurich and showed it to people and said, hey, what do you think about that? Is that interesting? Would you be interested in like learning more about this? And then we saw that many people didn't understand what it was about at all, but some were actually quite excited. And then we realized, okay, we maybe have to explain it better. Came up with a new version, did that. So we very practically tested it. And then roughly 6 weeks after just taking the decision we want to do this, we already invested the first customer portfolio. So it was a real portfolio. At that time, we didn't have a website yet. We didn't have an online service yet. So basically, we constructed the portfolio ourselves with handmade tools, Excel, for example, analysis that we did by hand. We created PDFs to show to the customer. And so over time, we bit by bit. And then after about a year or so, we were at a stage where the whole functionality was online, and we could actually start doing that in an automated space for more people, really improving also the depth of the sustainability analysis. So that's where we are now. The basis technology is there, and we can concentrate more on optimizing it.
I mean, that's something I'm really amazed at, because what you started with is this very strong, clear, long-term vision, basically the why piece. And then you started and then the next step was at the very other end, so to say, creating something super simple, going out, showing it to people, getting the feedback. And then you started closing the gap just one step at a time, from the bottom up, basically, to build it up and the next functionality and this, but you built it with the customer. And that's, I think so many forget that, because it's easy to forget to build it with the customer and for the customer, and not just to, to have something and create something. So that is something I'm very much amazed at, also at the speed at, of how fast you guys have done that. And I think it's very much because you've tested so quickly and so practically. So that's
that said, it's difficult, and there were times where we forgot or took. It's always easier to not test, because if you have more opinions, that just makes things a lot more complicated. The thing is, it saves you trouble later. But there were times where we thought, okay, we really want to push this out, we'll just do it now. And then we realized, okay, it doesn't work. So I think we did a lot of things good from the start, but we also had to learn them again and again.
Yeah, you're also human.
Well, yeah, very much so. Yeah.
No, that's really good. So and another thing I'm very curious about is, how do you work with founders' shares, with equity? Did you get to the table and say, let's just split it in equal shares? Let's work with this fancy methodology, or how did you? Or did you just didn't think about it, or how did you?
A bit of everything you said. So it's a difficult question. Nobody has an answer to it. There is no perfect way to do it. We actually what we did is we used a good method that is called slicing pie, where you assess people's contributions over time. We did tweak it quite a bit, because we weren't we had some special situations about who brought in which kind of knowledge, experience, network, but also the idea. So we tweaked it here and there, but basically we used the method to come up with an indication, and then we used that indication and thought, okay, do we think it makes sense? Then we discussed it a bit, and that's how we came up with a split. So we never used the model as it is intended, but we found it still very helpful. But I think in the end, what the important thing is there, that when at some point in time, you have to agree on a share split. And that means just looking each other into the eye and saying and promising, okay, I will be okay with this share split, because what's going to happen at some point in time, whether that is 6 months later or 6 years later, is that you'll think back and say, okay, actually, that contribution was a lot more or a lot less than I thought. It might be your own, it might be somebody else's, but you just have to make your peace with it, and that can only work if you really trust your founders and for example, are bound by a strong why, because the easiest way to resolve these kind of conflicts is just making the pie bigger, rather than fighting about the slices of the pie. So I think you just have to have some comfort with knowing that there will be a bit of friction from that, but not letting that friction actually materialize into dispute among the founders team. You have to be comfortable with, okay, if I later have the feeling that I should have fought for a better deal, then I just let it go rather than fighting for it later.
Yeah, good point. Okay. Another thing is how did you go from individual performer to team performer? Meaning, when things start out, very often you're in the trenches and sometimes trying to do it all yourself and just getting stuff done, running at light speed. And then you have a team, things are growing, and you realize, actually I have to slow down so the team can also be with me on the journey. There's a lot more communication going on. Everybody needs to be in the loop and all these kinds of things. So it's a lot more team dynamics versus individual dynamics. How did you make that transition? I mean, or another question, do you think you were just born with that? Or how did you make that transition from individual to team, so to say?
I think we're still making that transition. So that's just over lunch. I had a discussion with our marketing manager where we think about how we constantly change how we work together. Not her and me only, but like as a team, and how that can never stop. Just because we advance as a team, new things. Some things work, some things don't. So I think it's a constant transition, as at least as long as you're growing. I think one thing that makes it a lot easier, or maybe two things. First of all, hire great people. So just hire people that you're willing to listen to them and that you trust so much that if they have a good idea of what you could do differently, that you can assume that idea has a lot of merit. If you don't, you should never hire somebody where you think, okay, I don't want to hear about their ideas. And that's the first thing. And the second thing, I think what helped us is that I like to think that we were able to establish a culture where, everything can be challenged at any point in time. So nobody in the team needs to be scared when they say, this doesn't work, this way of communication doesn't work, we have too many meetings, we don't have enough meetings, there's too much communication, there's not enough communication, to just bring it up. And then have also a culture where you can just say, okay, then now we'll do it differently, we'll try this for 2 weeks, if it works, we'll keep doing it, and if not, we discuss again. And that's the stage that we're still in. And so I'm quite sure if we talk again in 2 months, a lot of things will be quite different in the way that we cooperate and communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question also about team and communication, basically. So are you all in the same office space, or do you have remote where you work together as well with the development team, outsource? How do you work with that?
So we're currently all right here in our office in Zurich. We do try to make flexible remote work possible, but we are actually strong believers and advocates for co-location, which means sitting together, being able to have quick discussions as needed, quick alignment as needed. So when we talk about remote work, that's usually when there's a good reason for it. So for example, you have a new couch delivered and you don't want to ruin your Saturday, so you just work from home in the morning until it's delivered. That's something that happens. So you would need to go see a doctor. Or we have an international team. So we've had cases where somebody had their parents who live on another continent visiting. They were traveling to France, so she traveled with them and was working remotely. So these kind of things we made possible, but we actually usually try to have everybody in the office because we think a lot of the topics that you brought up before about communications and working well as a team are just a lot easier when you can look into each other's face and just talk to each other. Also, it's fun, at least if you have a fun team.
Yeah, that's really interesting because there's very different approaches to it, and I guess the way you said it was a very conscious decision to go with that, right? Because some people say, all I want is the core to get started with, for the first couple of years, the core management team of 4 or 5 people in the location, and then everything else can be outsourced, and it's a very different approach. And it's so you mentioned communication and the team aspect and gluing together was one of the most important things also to, no matter what the sacrifice, so to say, also the cost, of course, it's always an important aspect, but to get everybody in the same room, basically.
Yes, but I think that's also size and stage related. We will not be able to all be in the same room forever. We will have different locations at some point. But for example, the cost question, that was a very conscious decision in the beginning. Do we outsource IT development somewhere else? And it was very, very clear no, because we are actually a technology company. So we need that in-house. And of course, it's more expensive to have an IT team in Zurich than it would be to nearshore it, say, to Serbia or somewhere. And there's great talent there. It's not even even that, need to hire locally in order to have the best possible talent. Luckily in Zurich, you do have a lot of very, very good people. But just sitting together with them on the same table, especially if you're at a stage where you're still trying to understand what you are building. I mean, we weren't, like in the first 1.5 years, we were never in a stage where we could just tell a freelancer, please build these 5 things, because usually we would build them in the morning and we would test them in the afternoon, and then they would all change again. So, I mean, there was also, while the salary cost might have been higher, it reduced a lot of cost because we didn't have a lot of waste. We were super agile. We still are super agile in the way that we develop software. And so I think that was a good decision. I'm quite sure prospectively we will have different places, and then that will change too. Yeah.
Okay. One thing, coming back to sort of like how you work, if you look at your average week today, and when you started very early on, does it look the same? Has it dramatically changed in terms of what you're doing and how you're doing and when you're doing things?
Well, yes. I mean, so now we have a great team where a lot of people are working on a lot of different things, and my job as the CEO is mainly, about making sure that overall we're making sense and we're working in a good direction. But in the beginning, like me and my co-founders, I mean, obviously we're doing everything. So, I mean, that's also a cool thing. Pretty much everything that's going on in the company, I used to do at some point, whether that's, investing, talking to customers, giving service, creating a portfolio, or even coding. But now for most of these more specialized functions, there are people on the team that can do a lot better than I can. So, I was able to prove in the beginning that it's possible, but then there are people now that do it a lot better. And my job is more to make sure that we work together as a team, and also to think about what's next and how do we move forward and what do we need to concentrate on. So the job has changed quite a bit.
Okay. So last question that I have, this is more up in the clouds and very, very much in the future. So let's say you're 80 years old now and you're sitting on your rocking chair, and wherever you are, maybe on your terrace, maybe on maybe on Mars, I don't know, somewhere, and you look back at your life. What is sort of like the impact or the change that you would want to see in the world over that period of time?
You mean for the world as a whole, or for me personally?
For the world as a whole, yes.
So I think, we are probably, in the big lottery of evolution, we're like incredibly lucky winners. If you look at the time that humans have been around, or like sentient beings have been around, nobody has ever had like an easier and nicer life than people born in Central Europe in the 80s, 90s, and 00 years. And that is changing now, but it will still, like everybody being born in the next 20 to 30 years has still won the lottery of evolution, and that's not even true only for the Western world, but now also in other parts of the world. We're making tremendous steps forward in the fight against poverty, and at the same time we're creating new problems, obviously, especially on the ecological side. But I think in general, humanity has done a lot of has figured a lot of really good things out in the last 100, 200, maybe 300 years, and not knowing the long-term consequences of some of these things has also set itself on a path that cannot go on forever. So hopefully when I'm 80, I can say, okay, we were able to, uphold all these awesome things, like living a liberal life, based on human rights. I'm actually still very much convinced that globalization has much, much more advantages than disadvantages. I mean, living in Europe, in my point in time, war just didn't exist except on the news. That was never the case in where I used to live. My hometown, Mainz, used to be French and German and French and German back and forth, and obviously not on friendly terms. So I think we're super, super lucky. So if we're able to uphold all these achievements while fixing some of the problems, there will always be problems, but avoiding the ecological crisis, managing the challenges that come from the disruptions in technology and especially biotechnology and artificial intelligence, many things happening there for sure in the next decades. If we manage to still, uphold these achievements, then I think I'll be quite happy.
That's powerful. Thank you for sharing. So one of the things we're going to do is below this video, we're going to link to some sources like the company page, LinkedIn profile and things like that. So people can on the one side, you know, follow the cool stuff that you guys are up to, connect with you of course as well, but also then, you know, connect about opportunities, whether that may be investment opportunities, board, talent, whatever comes up in the future. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Daniel.